There are only a handful of moments in history where the weather changed the fate of an entire civilization. This is one of them. For 700 years, the story has been simple. Japan was saved by a storm, a divine wind, the kamikaze. But here's the part almost nobody puts in the headline. The fleet that nearly ended Japan wasn't really Mongol. Most of those men had never seen the steppe. They were conscripts, shipbuilders, farmers, fighting under orders they barely understood. And in 1281, both sides were exhausted. The invaders were hungry. The defenders were running out of men. The sea was full of ships. The beaches were stained with blood. One more push. One more mistake. One more week, and the history of East Asia might have taken a completely different path. So today, we're going to strip away 7 centuries of legend, rewind the clock to Hakata Bay, and remove just one thing. Not an emperor, not a general, not a battle. Just the wind. Kublai Khan wasn't trying to become the next Genghis Khan. In fact, he was trying to stop looking like one. By the time Japan entered the story, the empire his grandfather had built was already beginning to crack. Mongol princes ruled vast territories like cousins squabbling over an inheritance. They shared blood more than vision. Kublai wanted something none of them had. He wanted China. Not its treasure, not its farmland, its throne. Because conquering China was only half the battle. Convincing China it had been conquered was another matter entirely. For centuries, emperors ruled under the mandate of heaven, heaven itself granting legitimacy. Kublai understood that better than most. So he dressed like a Chinese emperor, ruled through Chinese officials, embraced Chinese customs, and even gave his dynasty a Chinese name. Yuan. To some Mongols, it looked like betrayal. To Kublai, it looked like survival. But the southern Song dynasty still lived. As long as another emperor remained, every proclamation Kublai made carried an invisible question. If heaven had truly chosen him, why was there still another throne? Japan offered the perfect opportunity. Its merchants traded with the Song, its pirates harassed Yuan shipping, its rulers ignored Kublai completely. Bring Japan into the imperial order, and the Song would lose a partner, while another kingdom bowed to Yuan supremacy. So in 1266, Kublai chose diplomacy before war. He sent envoys demanding tribute. Japan answered with silence. He tried again. Silence. He tried again. This time, his messengers never came home. Their severed heads delivered the clearest message of all. The next visitors would not carry scrolls. They would carry an army. In 1274, roughly 800 ships and 20,000 troops crossed the strait toward Kyushu. But here's the detail that gets buried. This was overwhelmingly a Korean and Chinese operation. Korea had been conquered only years earlier and was ordered to build and crew the fleet. The soldiers were mostly conscripts, Korean and Chinese farmers and shipbuilders, commanded by a handful of Mongol officers. Calling it the Mongol invasion is like calling a McDonald's franchise an American-owned restaurant, because the logo says so. The fleet seized Tsushima and Iki in brutal fashion. Garrisons wiped out, civilians killed. Then they landed at Hakata Bay, the only realistic invasion point. What followed shocked both sides. Japan's samurai fought in single combat, announcing themselves before duels. The invaders fought in coordinated units with volley tactics and early gunpowder bombs the Japanese had never seen. For one brutal day, The Yuan force pushed inland. But an invasion without a supply chain can only push so far. By nightfall, the commander had taken an arrow wound, ammunition was draining, and Japanese defenders raided anchored ships at night. The invaders withdrew offshore. This is where the legend takes over. Popular history says a typhoon struck and destroyed the fleet, the first divine wind. Actual historians are skeptical. It wasn't typhoon season, the damage doesn't match storm records, and the miracle version appears mostly in later sources, once it became useful mythology. What's better supported is simpler. The invasion stalled, undersupplied, and overextended. No miracle required. Japan's first victory wasn't heaven's intervention. It was Japanese soldiers on Japanese soil fighting an exhausted invading force to a standstill. Kublai Khan, notably, did not accept "the weather did it." He sent more envoys in 1275 and 1279. Japan executed those, too. Kublai Khan refused to accept that Japan had survived because its soldiers fought harder, or because his generals made mistakes. Certainly not because an island kingdom had simply proved too difficult to conquer. No. The first invasion had been an inconvenience. The second would be overwhelming. By 1281, everything had changed. The southern Song dynasty was gone. China was finally his. The throne he had spent decades chasing now belonged to him. There was only one loose thread left: Japan. Not because it threatened the Yuan Empire, because it had dared to say no. So Kublai prepared an invasion unlike anything East Asia had ever seen. One fleet sailed from Korea, another assembled in southern China. Thousands of ships, tens of thousands of soldiers, sailors, engineers, archers, conscripts. Entire forests disappeared to build the armada. Shipyards worked day and night. Across the sea, Japan watched and waited. The first invasion had taught the shogunate a painful lesson. The sea would not protect them forever. So they built walls. Not castles, walls. Stone defenses stretched along the beaches of Hakata Bay, turning the shoreline into a fortress. For years, samurai abandoned their homes to stand watch over an ocean that looked exactly the same every morning. Families moved west. Harvests were planned around the possibility of war. Temples echoed with prayers day and night. Not because anyone believed prayers alone could stop an invasion, but because an entire nation needed to believe it was ready. Then, in the summer of 1281, the horizon disappeared. The Korean fleet arrived first. Wave after wave of ships pushed toward Hakata Bay, expecting another quick landing. Instead, they found stone. Behind those walls stood thousands of waiting defenders. Every beach had become a battlefield before the first arrow was even fired. The invasion stalled almost immediately. Every failed assault bought Japan another day. Every night, samurai slipped across the water in small boats, climbing aboard anchored Yuan ships under cover of darkness. Some returned before sunrise. Some never returned at all. But every raid burned supplies. Every raid spread fear. Every raid reminded the invaders that they had crossed the sea, only to find an enemy that refused to disappear. Weeks passed. Then the second fleet finally arrived. The sea filled with ships. Hundreds became thousands. It must have looked less like an armada and more like the ocean itself had decided to invade Japan. Surely now the walls would fall. Surely now numbers would win. They didn't. The defenders bent. They refused to break. Then, history stepped in. This time, the stories aren't exaggerating. This time, the records agree. This time, the wind really came. A powerful typhoon tore across Hakata Bay. Ships crashed into one another. Anchors snapped. Masts splintered. Men who had survived weeks of fighting disappeared beneath black water before they ever saw the enemy again. By sunrise, one of the largest invasion fleets the medieval world had ever assembled had become floating wreckage. For Japan, it was nothing short of divine. For Kublai Khan, it was unimaginable. He had conquered kingdoms, he had broken dynasties, he had united China, and now, twice, he had been defeated by an island that refused to surrender. The UN fleet vanished beneath the waves. But the storm didn't just end an invasion, it reshaped Japan. Hakata Bay fell silent. The wreckage drifted ashore. For the first time in years, Japan could breathe again. Victory, however, came at a cost. The shogunate had poured staggering resources into stone walls, permanent garrisons, and years of patrols. Entire communities had reorganized their lives around the expectation of war. The enemy was gone, the debt remained. And unlike most medieval wars, there was no plunder to divide, no land seized, no cities looted, no ransom paid. Thousands of samurai had risked everything, and many felt they received nothing in return. That frustration lingered long after the battlefield disappeared, destabilizing the Kamakura shogunate itself. Yet Japan carried away more than debt. It carried away a story, not simply that it had survived, but that it had been chosen. The divine wind became proof the islands were uniquely protected. That belief outlived every soldier at Hakata Bay. Centuries later, in another desperate war, Japan's leaders reached back across 700 years and borrowed the same word, kamikaze. And beneath the legend sat a quieter twist. The same sea that blocked Kublai Khan also shielded Japan from something far deadlier. While plague swept across Eurasia, killing millions, Japan's isolation spared it much of the catastrophe. One storm had stopped an army. Its isolation would help stop a disease. Which brings us to the question that changes everything. What if the storm never came? So, let's take the storm away. Nothing else changes. Kublai Khan doesn't suddenly become a military genius. The samurai don't suddenly become weaker. The walls at Hakata don't vanish overnight. History keeps every piece on the board, but one move shifts. The Southern Fleet arrives on schedule in June. Instead of straggling in weeks late, both invasion forces land together at the start of summer, before typhoon season can intervene. Kyushu falls first, not easily, but inevitably. The fortified wall that held for a month against a partial force cannot hold indefinitely against the full invasion army arriving together. Key clans are wiped out defending it. Others, watching the shogunate bleed money and men to save territory that isn't theirs, begin negotiating instead of dying for it. Japan doesn't collapse overnight. It fractures. Some lords keep fighting, others cut deals. Survival stops looking like victory and starts looking like exhaustion. Food runs short. Arrows become precious. Wounded men return to the walls because there is no one left to replace them. Eventually, the line breaks. And for the first time, Japan isn't fighting an army trying to land. It's fighting an army that has already landed. This is not a clean conquest. It's Japan's version of what happened to Kiev and Rus under the Mongols. Not a quick collapse, but a brutal, grinding, decade-long campaign of guerrilla resistance, defections, and reprisals. The shogunate, bankrupt and hollow, keeps calling up conscripts it cannot feed. Kublai Khan, obsessive to the end, keeps funding it long after rational cost-benefit says to stop. Because for him, this was never about Japan. It was about never being the emperor who lost. By the early 1300s, the Yuan dynasty collapses under its own weight, as it did historically. Japan is left independent, but shattered. No unifying national myth. No divine protection identity to rally future generations. A population reduced by war, famine, and displacement. Fractured clans that spent a generation fighting each other as much as the invaders. And that fracture echoes forward. When Portuguese traders arrive in the 1540s, they don't meet a proud, wary, culturally confident Japan dictating the terms of contact. They meet a Japan still stitching itself back together from a foreign occupation less than 3 centuries old. Fractured, hungry for allies, far more willing to let European guns and European religion in through the back door. You don't get a unified, isolationist Tokugawa shogunate calmly shutting its doors to the world in the 1600s. You get competing clans racing each other to make deals with whichever European power shows up first. The typhoon of 1281 didn't just save an army. In our timeline, it saved Japan's ability to walk into the modern era on its own terms, instead of somebody else's.